Hi everyone, good morning. My name is Ochuwa Alegeh, and my capstone presentation today is on Peru, cartel intimidation of local government officials in Vraem. When we speak about Vraem, we're talking about the valleys of the Apurimac and Montaro rivers, specifically to answer Peter's first question. The introduction of this conflict. So essentially, the cartels control the drug trade, which predominantly occurs in the rural areas of Peru, Vraem being a part of that region. And as the cartels continue to exert this oppressive power, they often begin to delegitimize the power of the structural government and begin to assert themselves as a superior authority. Cartels, as is obtainable in similar South American countries, use violent sources or violent tactics such as coercion and intimidation and things of that nature. And this has a negative impact on the local officials in the region as they are forced to comply with their demands as a result of the threat of violence and the fear of consequences that apply not only to themselves, but also to their family members. The actors in my conflict primarily are the local farmers, the cartels, and the local government officials, with secondary actors being the local law enforcement and the national government as well. Here we have my conflict map, which I have indicated the actors, tertiary actors are indicated in the purple circles, the primary actors are indicated in the yellow circles, and the primary actors in the pink ovals. Around this conflict map, you can also see the structures, which are also color-coded to represent security structures, political structures, social cultural structures, and economic structures as well. The lines that connect these structures and these actors represent the different dynamics that are in play in this conflict. So we have things like power, the lack of power, safety. We have positive influences and negative influences as well. The inhibiting lines and the firm lines show that there is a positive and negative relationship between these actors. And the conflict acts as a basis to help us to start to understand the motivations of each of these actors and how they work together with the rest of the situation in the conflict. In terms of theoretical frameworks, I looked at it through three main themes, being power, corruption and institutional weakness, and fear and intimidation. Under power, I'll speak about the power dependence theory, which essentially says that the relationship of power has to do with the degree to which one is dependent on the other based off of the ability to give valued resources. The moral exclusion theory, which is under the corruption and institutional weakness framework or theme, so to speak, talks about how when a person or people are outside of your sphere of moral consideration, you tend to behave towards them in a way that suggests that they are not worthy of justice or fair treatment. In terms of methodology, this is obviously relying heavily on qualitative secondary data. My data resources heavily depend on government publications, intergovernmental organizations publications, news articles, and local sources. When we talk about local sources, we're talking about sources that come directly out of Peru, such as the Peruvian Army's think tank publications. I've identified three core needs in this conflict that cut across the different actors, the first being safety, the second being economic alternatives, and the last being government stability. And here, my strategic goal is to reduce cartel-induced corruption and to reduce cartel-induced corruption among local government actors in Vraem, region of Peru, by fostering sustainable community-driven economic alternatives that decrease reliance on the illicit coca trade and strengthen local resilience through participatory development and cooperative governance. So the first intervention that I've come up with is economic alternatives. The rationale in this intervention here is that the absence of economic alternatives is basically the root of the sustenance of the drug trade. Because this region is particularly economically disadvantaged, the drug trade seems to be the only major access to some kind of economic prosperity. And as the cartels are at the helm of these affairs, this increases their power. In the past, the Lutheran World released a project called Transforming the Vraem, which was designed to basically diversify the kind of crops that were being harvested in the region and give them market access, try to combat this initiative as well. My suggestion or my recommendation here is to create a diverse revenue streams by identifying viable options for lucrative economic fields, using dialogue and deliberation between community members and also leveraging appreciative inquiry. In order for this intervention to be successful, there is a need for community buy-in, funding, trust, and security measures. Community buy-in here is indispensable because this is an intervention that really encourages community or local ownership and tries to empower local actors to really drive the change initiative. So it's important that they are able to buy into the idea. Dialogue and deliberation sessions also serve as an introductory mechanism into cultural sensitivity, because this is directly designed to target the risk of paternalism by putting the intervention in the hands of the local actors themselves and giving them the access to share their knowledge, share their insights, and most importantly, ensure that their voices are at the root of these interventions. There is a plethora of monitoring and evaluating plans that I've listed at the bottom. The second intervention that I have structured here is a violence interrupters program. Here, the rationale is that we can talk about economic changes, we can talk about social changes or governance changes. But if the people and the community members don't feel safe and are still afraid or at risk of the cartel violence, there's not much buy-in that you can get, or there's not much access to these change initiatives that will be available. So this really acts as a precursor to the other initiatives. In the past, there have been heavy military presence and local groups formed designed to target this presence of the cartels and the use of violence here. But heavy military presence hasn't worked because there have been multiple military campaigns and the cartels are essentially still growing stronger. My recommendation here is a community-led violence interrupters program. And in terms of things that we need to see this succeed, we're talking about buy-in from local community actors, a relationship between law enforcement and policymakers, long-term funding, security personnel, like I mentioned earlier, to ensure that the participants and the interrupters are safe and they feel like this is a risk worth taking. Speaking about cultural sensitivity, this is going to be designed to have reserved spaces for minority groups such as women and youth. And also, it's going to use a unanimous decision-making system to ensure that when the program speaks, they speak through one voice and no other voice is suppressed. The community governance model is my last intervention strategy. And here we're talking about basically filling the gap that the absence of state presence has created in Vraem specifically, and how the cartels have basically taken over this vacuum. So we're trying to reclaim that power and reclaim that space. Again, in the past, there's been a Plan Vraem, which is another heavy military organized intervention. And there's also been attempts through constitutional reforms to kind of bring back state presence into this region, but all of those have failed. And evidence of that is through the consistent change of heads of states between the years 2016 and 2022 in the region. My recommendation here is a network of community-based officials who receive adequate training in order to coordinate, monitor, advocate, and for the essential services and rights of the people of the community. Again, buy-in, security structures, and fundings are the core needs for this intervention to succeed. When we're speaking about cultural sensitivity, I intend for this to operate through a rotational leadership system. This will ensure that there is a constant balance of power and we are directly targeting the risk of someone or a group of people or a subgroup of people usurping power and basically replicating the problems that we already see existing in Vraem. So this is my network map here, and I have tried to kind of expand the pie a little bit more and bring in the more specific actors within the different groups and show that how they connect with each other. The structure here of this network is a hierarchical and a closed system. And essentially, it's both hierarchical and closed because it's very zoomed in on local actors and there is a close-knit relationship within the local actors. However, there's still a clear order of power between who is at the top, which will be the cartels, and how the other actors have access to power. So in terms of network and sustainability, I've identified the challenges and strategies that are designed to combat these challenges. We have issues like securing buy-in due to the risks associated with dealing with, a region that's heavily led or governed by cartels or cartel influence, the volatility of funding and short-term donor cycles, the risk of power imbalances emerging, the erosion of community trust and burnout. So I'll speak about two strategies that are designed to directly target these. So the first is community weaving webs of support. So this is a strategy that basically leverages on the relationships or the existing connections within the community, strengthens them and connects them to larger or external structures that have the resources that they'll need to make sure that these interventions are executed properly. And then another which I really enjoy is online environments for supporting change. So in each of these interventions, in a more detailed version of my presentation or my capstone, you'll see that they all rely on the use of online mechanism, whether it's chat boards or WhatsApp group chats or Facebook boards and things like this. And I've basically I outlined online environments as a sustainability strategy because it ensures that the interventions don't necessarily always have to occur on the ground. So even in the case of cartels coming to become more violent or threaten the interventions, the online space allows for interventions to continue to exist and people to continue to be connected and the network to continue to grow in a way that is somewhat in a cloud that can't be shut down or killed, so to speak. So lastly, we talk about how the network supports this or how the network map specifically supports this. It identifies how funding challenges can be navigated, but it also talks about how peripheral actors can come into this conflict and really make a difference. In terms of how we will know that sustainable change is happening, we're looking at economic evidence, social evidence, and governance evidence. An example of economic evidence is basically the level of dependence of each household on cocoa production and how that changes over time. In conclusion, I think that this project has a lot of possibilities. I think that is highly cross-cultural in applicability. One of the reasons why I chose to go with Peru is because I see a lot of similarities with this region and my own home country, even though it doesn't necessarily have the cocaine problem, but there's lots of similar issues in terms of, bandits or cartels or weak governance. And I think that there's something that basically cuts across several different demographics, so several different cultural regions. So I think it has a really high applicability level. And in terms of lessons learned, one thing for me is that peace building that excludes local voices or local actors will always remain incomplete. Thank you.